Hello, my name is Dr. Tiffany Tyler-Garner, and I have the privilege of serving as Executive Director for the Children's Advocacy Alliance, where we're bringing our time, talents, and resources to improving conditions for children in the areas of education, safety, economic well-being, and health. Today we're exploring foster care with Dashun Jackson and Vickie Wilson.
Hello, Ms. Vickie. Thank you so much for joining us. Ms. Vickie is the volunteer coordinator with the CASA program. Tell us about your role with the CASA program.
I essentially supervise a volunteer workforce that responds to the needs of children, specifically in protective custody and or foster care. So essentially, CASA volunteers play a primary role in two functions. One is that we look to well-being. The next is permanency. So our primary goal is to ensure timely permanency, and while the child is in protective custody, ensure that their well-being needs are being addressed.
Very nice. So, CASA program, how is someone able to, how are kids referred over to CASA, or how do they get involved with CASA?
Okay, so we exclusively serve children that are in protective custody and or foster care. So the first thing that will happen is that a condition and or a concern is brought to the attention of a child welfare agency. The child welfare agency gets involved. A judge will determine one way or the other if the case needs to stay open, if the child needs to stay in care. If the judge makes that decision, the child will stay in protective custody. Now there's a couple of things that need to happen. We need to set up the parameters and to discuss the conditions for return. What must happen in order for this child to go home? Is that the best option? And if it's not the best option, what are the other permanency options that will come into play? And I think that's the world that CASA volunteers live in. It's not black and white. It is not a 60-minute show that gets resolved with some superhuman person that solves all problems. It takes a long time to really sort through best interests and permanency. And so CASA volunteers, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate, is just that. A court will ask, once they've decided that a case will open, that an advocate be assigned to the case. Typically, CASA volunteers represent one child or one sibling group at a time, and their goal is to stay with that case until permanency is achieved. Their time in the case is spent building relationships, seeing the child at least once a month, but most of our CASA volunteers see their child more regularly, determining whether or not there's any problems in the case, where there's a gap that can be filled, or where a need has to be addressed, or it should be discussed either with the judge or with someone else on the team. And they go back to court on average once every 6 months to really report to the judge about what's happening in the case and to make recommendations so that the judge can finally say, okay, this is what I think that we should be working on for the next 6 months, or address any concerns that are brought to their attention.
That is amazing. So how would someone that wants to be a volunteer, what do they do? How can a normal person become a volunteer with CASA?
Yeah, so first of all, most of our volunteers do not have like a legal background or a child welfare background. They are really people that believe that children deserve normalcy in their childhood. They want to bring common sense into the courtroom, and they're okay with having an opinion that is different from others, because on many occasions and on many days, your opinion might be different from other people that are connected to your child. You will then be invited to an orientation where we will do a 1-hour virtual meeting to discuss the CASA program, because there's a lot of people who want to help children in foster care. Maybe this is the best fit for you. Maybe there are other opportunities that are a better fit based on your time, your skill set, because this is a commitment. CASA volunteers are expected to be around for at least a 2-year commitment, and it's because we want to see the case through permanency, and that's either a child going back home, which is through reunification, guardianship, meaning that someone takes on responsibility of that like parenting role, but legally the child or sibling group is still connected to their birth family. Termination of parental rights and adoption essentially means that the legal rights are terminated and then attached to someone else. And then we have UPLA or APLA, means Other Planned Permanent Living Arrangement, and that's reserved for children that are a little bit older. 16 and older, the team may say, you know what, we need to start preparing this child for independent options after care, because for whatever reason, one of the other permanency options is not working out. And so the CASA volunteer will regularly make recommendations on what they feel is in that child's best interest and report that back to the courts, and our goal is to stay there until permanency is achieved.
That is amazing. I can't say enough great things about the CASA program. I truly, like I said, I benefited from it years ago, and the effects of it still resonate today. I think it is for those folks that want to get involved and really volunteer, you really are making an impact in the lives of young people. What are the age ranges that a CASA volunteer could expect to get?
We will work with any child between the ages of 0 through 18 that's in protective custody. Some people are a bit concerned about representing a nonverbal child, or they say, how can you do that? This child cannot speak. The reality is that you can, through great research, relationships, seeing your child face to face, you literally can figure out what's going on in this child's life and make a recommendation around best interests without having a child verbalize something to you. Let's just say a child says, I want to eat at this fast food restaurant every single day. I want to do this. I want to go to Disneyland on the weekends. A CAP attorney honestly should go to court and represent what that client says that they want. A CASA volunteer should know what the client says they want, but they should advocate for best interests, and that doesn't always align. A 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 17-year-old can clearly want something that is not in their best interest. And so sometimes they are the same and sometimes they're different. A CASA volunteer doesn't necessarily have a legal background. As a matter of fact, most of our CASA volunteers do not, because they're really there to bring common sense into the courtroom. Would a common person, if they had relationships with this child and this team, did great research, had a great relationship with this child, what would be their interest? And that was the whole concept behind the original CASA program. In 1977 was the original program.
Wow.
In Seattle, Washington. And a judge was overseeing a case and he said, you know what? We have a lot of great people in the courtroom, but what we are missing is that singular voice to focus on best interest of children. We have many people that care about children. There are people that have child welfare backgrounds. There are attorneys. There are people that are representing the whole family, or people that are trying to accomplish a singular task. That would be like, I'm trying to complete an adoption. I'm trying to process something that's necessary for the case. He said, we need someone to take a holistic approach. We need someone who is connected to everything and has a singular focus and priority on the child's best interests. And so he was able to recruit his first 50 volunteers with help from his bailiff. And since 1977, we now have over 900 chapters across the nation. And we are lucky. We were early adapters to the CASA program. In 1980, Judge Mendoza started our program here. And he said, there's some great things going on. There's some advocates that are helping children, and we could use this extra voice, this extra set of eyes on this case. And since our original program from 1980 with the original 15 volunteers, we have nearly 370 today. That is nice growth, but the reality is, as you know, we have over 3,000 children in protective custody.
When it comes to the need for volunteers, so there's two questions that I'm going to ask. The first being the need for volunteers. I know you said that there is, as we know, there's more than 3,000 youth that are in foster care in the state, but there's even a less amount of actual volunteers, and so there's not enough volunteers to represent every youth that are currently in the foster care system, right?
That is correct. So we have to prioritize. We literally look at the cases because the judge essentially says, yes, I agree that a CASA volunteer should be on this case, and we get what's called a CASA order. And then from that, our department receives it, and our program receives it, but because we don't have a CASA volunteer assigned to it, essentially one of our supervisors will monitor that case, and she will bring it to our attention when a case could really benefit from that CASA volunteer. We also have graduations. That tends to be when we match the most amount of cases, because as you're going through training as a CASA volunteer, our team will select a case for you. So right now, I believe we have about 30 volunteers that will go through our next class. So when they graduate, there will be 30 separate cases if all of them move through the process, 30 separate cases that can be assigned to that class. And for cases, we either consider an individual child or a sibling group.
That's great. So there's clearly a need. We definitely need folks to volunteer, and you can be anywhere in the rural areas. What I want to speak to now is your thoughts on some of the services that are needed for youth in foster care. So what do you see as being some of the greatest needs and services that foster youth need?
That is a very big question. I believe that a lot of people, when they talk about services, they're looking for a single solution, or they hope that there'll be a single solution. Like, if we do this one thing, it'll solve all problems. The reality is that every case is situational, and even if our involvement is a very similar reason, when you peel back the layers of each case, there's likely going to be something that is unique and specific to that family. I mean, I can speak in general terms. If we had better mental health services, that would definitely assist with a lot of our families. If we had more substance abuse treatment services, that would be very helpful to many of our families. If we had better services just for children in general, more foster parents for older, younger, larger sibling groups would absolutely be great, because the reality is that while we're working on all of this, children need a safe place to be.
It's providing those opportunities specifically for youth that are transitioning out of the foster care system to get employment. And so I think there's a lot of employers out there where foster youth or youth with foster care experience would be great in. I think the community has the ability to really look at, again, where they can provide, where they can support, whether that be with respite care, where the children are placed there temporarily, whether that be with being an actual foster parent, whether that be with being a CASA, a volunteer. There's so many opportunities to really provide assistance and support to youth in the foster care system. I think it's also looking at where can you step in and really be that mentor. Rather, CASA may not be your go-to. What other avenues out there could you support a youth educationally? They have educational liaisons. Where can you support youth when it comes to employment? One of the greatest things that I think I had was a foster dad that provided me with employment opportunities. He provided me with housing when I needed it. But he was also there and consistent. And I think as we start to look at how we can support youth and how we can support specifically youth transitioning out of the foster care system, mentors, because once youth age out of the system, and we're in a place where we're looking at extending foster care to the age of 21. But until we get to that point, and even beyond that, how can folks step in and provide that mentorship, that one-on-one? And that's one of the things that I do like about CASA, is that they don't necessarily only end when the child turns 18, but there is some communication that happens even well after that, and some follow-up that happens to see how the youth are doing authentically. And I think that's one of the another important piece is the authentic engagement that CASA does bring to youth and to families. And so to connecting them also with resources. You mentioned the graduation, the class that you all have of new CASAs coming in. That's an important piece, and I think that's one piece that has to be highlighted, is that these are normal, regular people that are choosing to make a difference in the lives of foster youth, or youth in general, by just speaking up and being there and being present. One of the questions that I have is how are youth matched with a volunteer?
So the initial decision will be made while the volunteer is in training. So there are multiple stages in which you will be asked as a CASA applicant, what is your desire? So you will be asked on the initial application, do you have any other volunteer experience? What are you thinking as far as your role as a CASA volunteer? When you go through training, you will be asked a few times, can you clarify, what do you think you'd be a great match for? So we talk about younger children, older children. We also talk about disposition and disabilities. And then our training coordinator, who's our lead, her name is Cheryl. She'll get to know you pretty well, because our training is about 30 hours of in-class, and then there's what we call road work that will be done outside of the classroom. So she'll get a sense of who you are. There's also an interview process where there are multiple people who will sit on your panel. We will likely discuss your childhood, your professional experience. So sometimes things just work out to where you're like, you know what, this person lives in Henderson, they're a retired teacher, they love soccer, we have this other kid who lives in Henderson, would love to play sports, this, that, the other. It's like, wow, that would be a great match. So sometimes we look at proximity, background, professional interests, social interests. There just may be a common connection between the CASA volunteer and the child that we say, hey, we think that they could relate to that. And so a lot of things go into that decision-making process when we decide to match the CASA volunteer with the first case. And then after that, the applicant, or who's now a CASA volunteer, has an opportunity to let their supervisor know when they're ready to consider another case. Usually most CASA volunteers will do it after their first case is open. One case closes, another case will open.
One of the unfortunate pieces about a foster care system is that it teaches, in a sense, relationships that are being destroyed, but it doesn't teach about building relationships and maintaining relationships. And I think that's one of the unique pieces about the CASA program, is that it does have this component of building relationships and understanding that you can get the most work done when relationships are built. And I think as volunteers stay on and they get to know their youth and their young people, they're building and developing this amazing relationship. From time to time, I see my CASA, and we still have a good relationship. And so I think it's those beautiful pieces that really make an impact in the lives of young people. And so there's a need.
And I know that this is a community that responds. I mean, I have been blessed to be a volunteer manager in 3 different capacities for this community. One of them being with American Red Cross. I was the volunteer manager during the 1 October incident. I also then was pulled over to assist the fire department with the COVID-19 response initially. And then I chose to be a part of CASA. And one thing I know about this community is that it's a community that cares. It cares about people, it cares about families, and it will respond. And so I think with CASA, a lot of people, I don't believe, are aware that this opportunity is here for people to be an advocate and to step up.
I can't say enough. I cannot not say enough great things about the CASA program because, like I said, I benefited from it. I think it is phenomenal. I enjoy the folks that lead it because their hearts are there. There's passion in there. One of the things you mentioned was that you don't just quickly assign youth and to adults, volunteers. That's amazing. So you take time to actually make sure that there's a match that happens.
Yeah, our ability to help children in foster care only extends as far as my ability to recruit volunteers that are willing to step up and be an advocate on behalf of this child. So I don't take lightly, because we ask as a program that you commit to at least a 2-year commitment. The reality is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our volunteers extend well past that as far as that relationship of being involved with that child. To include, some of our children go back home to their birth families and they are still connected to that child. Some children exit the foster care, some children are adopted, some children go into some type of guardianship arrangement. And so I don't take lightly that could be a lifelong relationship.
I definitely want to highlight is there's 2 youth groups that youth are able to get involved in if they're in the foster care system. One is called Foster and Adopted Youth Together, commonly known as FATE. And they are Clark County's Foster Youth Advisory Board. So youth of any ages, really 10 plus, are able to get involved in this. This is a youth advocacy program group made up of current and former foster youth that have decided to come together, not only to have fun, which is the biggest piece of it, but also to make changes within the foster care system. Out of this group, part of this group came the Foster Care Bill of Rights, the Sibling Bill of Rights, and so it has done some amazing work. The other group is Nevada Life Youth Advisory Board, which is also it's the State Youth Advisory Board, and it is the same group made up of current and former foster youth that are making a change within the foster care system here in the state. And so definitely want to put those 2 out. And so youth that are able and wanting to get involved in those groups definitely can reach out to myself, to CAA, and we can connect you with those 2 youth groups. But I also want to see what are some of your call to actions. One question that I want to ask you is, can one person make a difference?
CASA volunteers tend to be for children that stay in foster care a little bit longer. Research has shown that in many of those cases, the CASA volunteer has that longest relationship. I review CASA reports all the time. It is not uncommon to see a CASA volunteer have over 100 contacts within a 6-month period. Not exclusively with the child, it could be with the case manager, the attorney, the school, but on no other reports have I seen that level of contact. So when that one person is doing those things, it absolutely makes a difference to the well-being and permanency of a child in foster care. And as far as reaching out to the CASA program, you're always welcome to reach out 24 hours a day at casalasvegas.org. Again, that's casalasvegas.org. You are also welcome to call the CASA program, and our telephone number is 702-455-CASA. That's 702-455-2272.
Thank you so much. So you all heard it here. Ms. Vickie, the volunteer coordinator with the CASA program. If you want to get involved, contact Ms. Vickie or contact CASA.org, and they will definitely be able to get you connected and get you connected with some youth. So thank you, Ms. Vickie, for joining us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for joining our podcast. Please be sure to tune in to our next podcast where we'll explore the state of education in Nevada.